The champagne flutes clinked as Melissa smirked, raising her glass high above her head. "Here's to finally stealing him away," she said, her voice dripping with triumph, her eyes locked on mine. The room froze. Family, friends, co-workers, all crammed into the glittering hall for what they thought was a celebration of 10 years of marriage, sat in stunned silence. Awkward laughter bubbled at the edges of the crowd, as if people weren't sure whether to treat it as a joke or a declaration of war. Everyone waited for me to cry, to scream, to throw the glass in my hand across the room. But instead, I stood, tall, lifted my chin and smiled. "Perfect timing," I said, raising my own glass with a steady hand. "Because tonight, I'm announcing my divorce." The silence that followed was louder than any scream I could have given. But to understand why that moment mattered, you need to know the story of how we got here. I met Daniel 12 years ago at a coffee shop downtown. He wasn't the type who commanded attention when he walked into a room. No designer clothes, no flashy car keys jingling from manicured fingers. He was reading a worn paperback, glasses sliding down his nose, completely absorbed in whatever world lived between those pages. When he looked up and caught me staring, his smile was shy, genuine. The kind that reaches your eyes before it touches your lips. "Good book?" I asked, sliding into the chair across from him uninvited. Most men would have been annoyed by the interruption. Daniel just closed the book, keeping his finger marked on the page, and said, "Want to find out?" We talked for 3 hours. About books, about dreams deferred and dreams pursued, about the small disappointments that shape us and the tiny victories that keep us going. He walked me to my car in the rain, and when he kissed me goodnight, it felt like coming home to a place I'd never been. Those first years were a montage of small, perfect moments. Grocery shopping on Sunday mornings, arguing over cereals and laughing at our own silliness. Painting our first apartment together, getting more paint on ourselves than the walls. Daniel. Singing off-key in the shower while I made coffee, both of us pretending I couldn't hear him. We weren't rich. Our furniture came from garage sales and Facebook Marketplace. Our date nights were picnics in the park and matinee movies with stale popcorn. But we had something I'd never experienced before. Partnership. When my car broke down, Daniel didn't just offer to drive me places. He researched repair shops, negotiated prices, held my hand while we waited for bad news about the transmission. When his mother got sick, I didn't just send flowers. I learned her favorite recipes, sat with her during chemo treatments, held Daniel while he cried in our tiny kitchen at 2 a.m. We were building something together, brick by careful brick. The proposal came on a Tuesday. Not at a fancy restaurant or on a beach at sunset, but in our living room with Chinese takeout containers scattered across the coffee table. Daniel had been quiet all evening, fidgeting with his chopsticks, barely touching his lo mein. "I know this isn't romantic," he said suddenly, pulling a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. "But I can't wait for the perfect moment because every moment with you already is," I cried. Not just because of the ring, a simple solitaire that caught the light from our thrift store lamp, but because I believed, truly believed, that I had finally found my person. The one who would choose me every day for the rest of our lives. Our wedding was small, intimate, perfect in its imperfection. My dress had a tiny stain on the hem from dancing in the garden afterward. Daniel forgot his vows and had to improvise, his voice shaking as he promised to love me, even when I leave coffee rings on the furniture and steal the covers at night. The first few years of marriage were everything the romance novels promised. We developed our rhythms, our inside jokes, our shorthand language of glances across crowded rooms. Daniel would bring me tea without being asked when I had a rough day at work. I'd record his favorite shows when he had to work late, fast-forwarding through commercials so we could watch together. We talked about children, about the house we'd buy someday with a big backyard and room for a dog. We had names picked out, Emma for a girl, after his grandmother, Michael for a boy, after mine. Our future felt certain, mapped out in shared dreams and whispered promises. Melissa entered our lives like a slow-moving storm. At first, she was just a name Daniel mentioned occasionally. A new hire at his marketing firm, someone who was really sharp and bringing fresh ideas to the team. Then she became a face at the company holiday party. Tall, willowy, with the kind of effortless beauty that made other women unconsciously touch their own hair. She laughed at all of Daniel's jokes, even the ones that weren't funny, and had this way of touching his arm when she talked that lingered just a second too long. "She's just friendly," Daniel said when I mentioned it on the drive home. "You know how people in marketing are. They're trained to be charming." I wanted to believe him. More than that, I wanted to like her. When she started joining our group dinners, I made an effort to include her in conversations, to ask about her life, to be the kind of wife who was secure enough to befriend her husband's attractive female colleagues. But there were moments, fleeting, easy to dismiss, that made my skin prickle. The way she'd lean into Daniel when reaching for the salt. How her eyes would find mine when she complimented his shirt, as if checking for a reaction. The subtle way she'd redirect conversations back to shared work experiences I couldn't participate in. "You're being paranoid," I told myself. The same. Words Daniel would echo later. "She's just confident. You're just insecure." The changes started small. Daniel, working later, staying for team drinks that somehow never included other team members' spouses. Weekend texts about urgent projects that needed immediate attention. His phone face down on the dinner table, buzzing with notifications he'd check later, always later. When I asked about his day, his answers became shorter, less detailed. Where he used to tell me everything, the annoying client who wanted to change their logo for the 5th time, the intern who accidentally sent a proposal to the wrong company, now I got generic responses. "Fine. Busy. You know how it is." Our conversations, once meandering and effortless, became functional. Grocery lists and utility bills and whose turn it was to call the landlord about the leaky faucet. We were becoming roommates who happened to share a bed, and I couldn't pinpoint exactly when the shift had happened. The first time I smelled unfamiliar perfume on his shirt, I almost said nothing. It was sweet, floral, nothing like the subtle vanilla scent I wore. When I mentioned it, Daniel barely looked up from his laptop. "Probably from the elevator," he said. "You know how strong some people wear their perfume." I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. So I did, filing away my suspicions like items I might need later but hoped I'd never have to use. But the evidence kept accumulating. Credit card charges at restaurants I'd never been to, always for 2 people. A receipt in his jacket pocket from a lingerie store, expensive items in a size that wasn't mine. When I found it, my hands shook as I confronted him. "It's for you," he said, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "I wanted to surprise you for our anniversary." Our anniversary was still 3 months away, and the receipt was for items in a size larger than I wore, but I wanted to believe him. I needed the explanation more than I needed the truth. The late-night phone calls started around month 6 of what I now realize was their affair. Daniel would step onto the balcony, closing the sliding door behind him, his voice too low for me to hear words, but animated in a way it hadn't been with me in months. "Work crisis," he'd say when he came back inside. But his eyes were bright, energized. He looked like someone who'd just received good news, not someone who'd spent 20 minutes dealing with professional emergencies. I started paying attention to his patterns, hating myself for the surveillance but unable to stop. Tuesday nights, he worked late. Thursday afternoons, sudden meetings that couldn't be postponed. Saturday mornings, urgent calls from the office that required his immediate attention. Always the same days, always the same excuses. The morning I found the messages, Daniel was in the shower, humming a song I didn't recognize. His phone lay on the nightstand, screen up, vibrating with notifications. I'd never invaded his privacy before. It felt like crossing a line we couldn't uncross. But the name on the screen made my blood freeze. M. My hand moved without conscious thought, swiping to unlock the phone. No passcode. Another small betrayal. The assumption that I'd never look. The messages stretched back months, hundreds of them. A digital love affair playing out in real time while I slept beside him every night. Last night was incredible. I keep thinking about your hands. She suspects nothing. You're such a good actress around her. Can't wait until this charade is over and we can be together properly. Our anniversary will be our beginning. I read until my eyes burned, until the words blurred together into a narrative I couldn't unknow. They weren't just having an affair. They were planning a future. My future. The house Daniel and I had talked about buying, the children we'd discussed having, the life we'd built together. He was promising it all to her. The shower was still running when I set the phone back down. I walked to the kitchen on shaking legs, poured myself a cup of coffee, and sat at our little table trying to process the complete destruction of everything I'd believed about my life. When Daniel emerged, towel around his waist, hair damp and curling at the edges, he found me sitting there with an expression he'd never seen before. "You read them," he said. Not a question. He knew. "Yes," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. What followed was the longest conversation of our marriage. Daniel cried, actual tears that I might have found moving if they weren't coming 3 months too late. He begged, pleaded, promised to end things with Melissa immediately. It meant nothing, he said, the lie so cliched it was almost insulting. "You're my wife. You're the one I love." But I'd read the messages. I knew what nothing looked like, and it looked like planning weekend getaways and discussing engagement rings, and comparing me unfavorably to her in ways that would replay in my mind for months. "How long?" I asked. "It doesn't matter." "How long, Daniel?" 8 months. 8 months. 2/3 of a year. While I'd been planning our anniversary celebration, he'd been planning his exit strategy. While I'd been trying to understand why our marriage felt distant, he'd been building intimacy with someone else. That night, Daniel slept on the couch. I lay awake in our bed, staring at the ceiling, not crying. That would come later, but calculating, thinking, planning. By morning, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I called in sick to work and spent the day making appointments. Lawyer first, a woman who specialized in infidelity cases and had the kind of reputation that made cheating husbands nervous. Then the bank, to understand exactly what assets we shared and how to protect myself. Daniel texted throughout the day, trying to gauge my mood, testing whether his tears had bought him forgiveness. I responded normally, even lovingly. Let him think the storm had passed. While he was at work, or with her, I no longer distinguished between the two. I photographed everything. Bank statements, insurance policies, the deed to the house we'd bought together the previous year. I downloaded our shared cloud storage, backed up emails, created a paper trail that would tell the story of our marriage in black and white. The lawyer was impressed. "Most people come to me emotional and unprepared," she said, looking through my organized files. "You're ready for war." I wasn't ready for war. I was ready for justice. Our 10th anniversary was 3 weeks away. We'd already sent invitations for a party at the Riverside Event Center. 150 guests, catered dinner, a DJ who specialized in music from the year we met. Daniel's colleagues, my family, friends who'd celebrated with us through every milestone of our relationship. I could have canceled, made excuses, cited illness or work conflicts. Instead, I confirmed every detail. The flowers, white roses, his favorite. The menu, prime rib and salmon, accommodating everyone's dietary restrictions. The playlist, songs from our first dance to the music we'd discovered together over the years. Daniel was nervous about the party, I realized. He'd started working even later, taking even more emergency calls. I suspected he was trying to figure out how to navigate an evening with both his wife and his mistress in the same room. I wasn't going to make it easy for him. "You invited Melissa, right?" I asked casually over dinner one evening. "It would be awkward if your coworkers thought we'd forgotten about her." The relief on his face was almost comical. "Yes, of course. She's looking forward to it." I bet she was. The night before our anniversary party, I packed a bag. Not obviously, just some clothes, important documents, items I couldn't replace. I hid it in my car trunk, along with the evidence I'd gathered, and copies of all the legal papers my attorney had prepared. Daniel was nervous, pacing around our apartment, adjusting his tie, checking his appearance in every mirror. "Do I look okay?" he asked, the same question he'd asked before every important event in our marriage. "You look perfect," I said, and meant it. He looked perfect for what was about to happen. I took my time getting ready. The dress, a midnight blue number that made my skin glow and my eyes look luminous. Hair swept up to show off the diamond earrings Daniel had given me for our 5th anniversary, back when his gifts came from his heart instead of his guilt. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. Not because I looked different, but because I felt different. Powerful. Ready. The Riverside Event Center glowed with warm light, candles flickering on every table, white roses cascading from tall centerpieces. Our wedding photos lined the entrance hallway, a timeline of happiness that now felt like evidence in a case I was about to present. Guests arrived in waves, hugging us, congratulating us, marveling at how good we looked together after 10 years. "You two haven't aged a day," my aunt said, kissing my cheek. "What's your secret?" "Communication," I said with a smile. "Always being honest with each other." Daniel's laugh sounded forced, but nobody else seemed to notice. He played his part perfectly, the devoted husband, hand on the small of my back, introducing me to new colleagues, sharing inside jokes with old friends. Melissa arrived fashionably late, as I'd expected. She wore red, a power color, meant to command attention. The dress was expensive, sophisticated, the kind of outfit that announced she belonged in rooms like this. Her smile when she hugged Daniel lasted just a moment too long, her fingers trailing across his shoulder as she pulled away. "Congratulations," she said to me, air-kissing my cheeks. 10 years, that's quite an accomplishment these days. "We're just getting started," I replied, raising my champagne glass. "The best is yet to come." Dinner was perfect. The speeches were heartfelt. My father toasted the marriage that restored his faith in lasting love. Daniel's best man joked about how Daniel had become a better man since meeting me, how I'd tamed the bachelor and made him worthy of forever. Through it all, I watched Daniel and Melissa. The stolen glances, the careful choreography of two people trying not to appear too familiar. She laughed at his jokes from across the room. He found excuses to walk past her. Table? They thought they were being subtle. They had no idea I was narrating their every move to the friends who mattered, the family members who'd need to understand later why this night ended the way it did. "Melissa seems nice," my sister said, following my gaze. "Very attentive to Daniel." "She's very attentive," I agreed. "Almost like she's planning something special." The DJ had just announced the last dance when Melissa stood up. I'd been waiting for this moment, watching her drink steadily throughout the evening, watching her confidence build with each glass of champagne. She raised her glass high, commanding attention from the entire room. The conversations died down, all eyes turning toward her expectant face. "I hope you don't mind," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the room. "But I wanted to make a toast." Daniel's face went pale, He started to stand, perhaps to stop her, but she was already speaking. "Here's to finally stealing him away," she said, her eyes locked on mine, her smile triumphant. The room froze. I could hear my heartbeat in the eye. Silence, could feel the shock rippling through the crowd like a physical force. Some people laughed nervously, assuming it was a joke in poor taste. Others stared openly, finally seeing what had been happening right in front of them. Daniel looked, like he might vomit. And I stood up. "Perfect timing," I said, my voice steady, carrying to every corner of the room. "Because tonight, I'm announcing my divorce." The collective gasp was audible. Chairs scraped against the floor as people turned to get a better view. My mother's hand flew to her chest. Daniel's sister dropped her wine glass, the crystal shattering against the hardwood floor. But I wasn't finished. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. "Not just to celebrate 10 years of marriage, but to witness the end of a lie and the beginning of my freedom." Daniel reached for me, his face desperate. "Please, we can—" "No, Daniel," I said, stepping away from his outstretched hand. "You've done enough talking, with her, for months, about our future that you were giving away, about the life we built that you were planning to share with someone else." The room was dead silent now. Even the staff had stopped serving, frozen with trays in their hands, watching the real-time destruction of what everyone had believed was a perfect marriage. "For 8 months," I said, looking directly at Melissa, whose triumphant expression had curdled into something closer to panic. "You two have been planning this moment, congratulating yourselves on fooling me, on stealing my husband right from under my nose." I reached into my purse and pulled out printed copies of their text messages, fanned them like a deck of cards. "Would you like me to read some of your favorite conversations? The one where you discuss my boring personality? Or maybe the one where you plan what you'll do with the house Daniel and I bought together?" Melissa's face had gone from red to white to a sickly green. She sat down, heavily, her carefully constructed confidence crumbling in real time. Daniel was saying something. Apologies, explanations, desperate pleas. But his words sounded distant, unimportant. I was no longer listening to him. I was speaking to the room, to the people who mattered, to the witnesses I needed. "Marriage is supposed to be about partnership," I said. "About choosing each other every day, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. But for 8 months, while I chose Daniel every morning when I woke up, every evening when I came home, every moment in between he was choosing her, I pulled off my wedding ring, the ring he'd placed on my finger in this very venue 10 years ago, and set it on the table. So tonight, instead of celebrating 10 years of marriage, we're celebrating 10 years of learning who I am when I'm not, being betrayed. 10 years of growth that led me to this moment, when I finally have the strength to choose myself." The silence stretched like a held breath. "Melissa," I said, turning to face her directly, "you didn't steal my husband. You stole my burden, and I want you to know how grateful I am." I picked up my purse, straightened my shoulders, and walked toward the exit. Behind me, the room erupted into chaos. Voices raised in shock, in anger, in confusion, chair legs scraping, as people stood, moved, tried to process what they'd just witnessed. Daniel called my name, his voice breaking. I heard footsteps behind me, but I didn't turn around. I'd said everything I needed to say. In the parking lot, my sister caught up with me. "Are you okay?" she asked, breathless from running in heels. I looked back at the event center, golden, light spilling from the windows, the sound of raised voices drifting across the evening air. "I'm perfect," I said, and meant it. The story spread quickly. By Monday morning, everyone Daniel worked with knew what had happened. Melissa took a week of sick leave and then quietly transferred to another department. Daniel moved out of our apartment within the week, claiming he needed space to think. I didn't make it difficult for him. His clothes were packed neatly, his books boxed and labeled, his half of our shared belongings waiting by the door when he came to collect them. "I never meant for it to happen this way," he said, standing in the doorway of the home we'd built, together. "Yes, you did," I replied calmly. "You just meant for it to happen quietly, with me having no say in my own life. The only thing you didn't plan was getting caught." The divorce proceedings were swift. My lawyer had prepared everything perfectly, and Daniel's guilt made him agreeable to terms he might have fought under different circumstances. 6 months later, I moved into a new apartment across town. Hardwood floors that gleamed in the morning, sun, big windows that framed the city skyline, space that belonged entirely to me. I kept some of our wedding photos, not out of nostalgia, but as reminders of who I used to be. The woman who stayed quiet when her instincts screamed warnings. The woman who chose peace over truth, comfort over growth. That woman served her purpose. She got me through the early years, the building phase, the learning what partnership could look like when it was genuine. But she wasn't built for betrayal. She wasn't equipped to handle being systematically deceived by the person she trusted most. The woman I am now? She's different, stronger. She listens to her intuition without apologizing for it. She asks difficult questions and demands honest answers. She knows the difference between being loved and being managed. People ask me if I hate Daniel, if I regret the public way everything ended. The truth is more complicated than that. I don't hate him. Hate would require caring about his opinion, his feelings, his future in ways that no longer serve me. What I feel is something closer to indifference, the emotional equivalent of changing the channel when something boring comes on television. As for the public revelation, I regret nothing. For too many years, I suffered in private, doubting myself in silence, absorbing his lies and her smugness without defense. That night, for the first time in our entire relationship, I got to tell the truth loudly, clearly, with witnesses who could verify that I wasn't the crazy, jealous wife he'd painted me as in private. I got to show everyone who Daniel really was when he thought no one was watching. The last I heard, Daniel and Melissa lasted 3 months after my divorce was final. Apparently, relationships built on deception don't have strong foundations, even when the obstacle is removed. I could say I'm surprised, but that would be a lie. And I've committed to radical honesty in this new phase of my life. The truth is, people who are willing to betray one person will eventually betray another. Trust, once broken, reveals cracks in character that can't be repaired with promises or good intentions. Daniel didn't just cheat on me. He cheated on the man I believed he was, the man who made quiet promises in a Chinese restaurant, the man who held my hand through his mother's illness. That man was real once, but somewhere along the way, he chose comfort over growth, deception over difficult conversations, the temporary thrill of secrets over the lasting satisfaction of integrity. I don't mourn the end of our marriage anymore. I celebrate the end of my illusions. Because here's what I learned in that glittering hall, standing in front of everyone who mattered to us. The most powerful revenge isn't making someone pay for hurting you. It's showing them that they never had the power to destroy you in the first place. Melissa thought she was stealing my husband. Daniel thought he was managing my ignorance. Neither of them realized they were actually setting me free,